Hey, it's PK Beats, and this is the series where I go to various wiki pages for Smash related stuff, usually going down to the trivia section and finding interesting things to test out and then share with all of y'all. Before that, just something I wanted to bring up from my last cherry-filled video. There was this part where I mentioned how the in-game frame-by-frame didn't capture the first 2 frames where any spawned food was actually a cherry, and how I had to see that in my editing software. Well, while editing the video, I noticed something interesting that the more astute of you also pointed out. But while in this frame, my food had been turned into bread like it should, in the Jumbotron, it's still a cherry. If you look at the Jumbotron in-game, be it in real time or in frame by frame, it'll look like the screen perfectly matches your movements by the frame. But again, with basic editing, we can see the single frame delay between when Kirby's jab comes out. And this delay is further delayed in the Jumbotron's appearance within the Jumbotron. And you know, I wonder how many Jumbotrons there even are. We can barely see the 4th screen here, and can slightly make out that this too is also delayed a frame. Did they just stop trying to render a screen after this level, or what? How far can this inception go? How deep is the Jumbotron lore? Anyways, before we get to today's main course, I'd like to thank our video sponsor, ProtonVPN. ProtonVPN is a high-speed open-source VPN with over 100 million users worldwide. With it, your browsing activity gets protected with absolutely no bandwidth limits. And for my favorite use, you can even access geo-blocked content, such as Netflix catalogs from different countries. Great for learning a new language, by the way. And ProtonVPN does all of this while ensuring complete privacy because they don't log or share your data with third parties. And it has a built-in ad blocker to shield you from malware or intrusive website trackers. Or, you know, just ads. You can connect to over 2,900 servers in 68 countries on all of your devices, so you're covered wherever you go. So if you click the link down in the description, you can download ProtonVPN and get 57% off on the 2-year plan, and get access to the highest speeds and premium features the app has to offer. Again, just click the link in the description, and thank you ProtonVPN for sponsoring today's video. Alright, for today's star of the show, there's actually this part of the wiki that brings up the results of a poll made back in 1999 by Sakurai, whose topic was, if there was a second Smash Bros. Game, who would you want to see in it? I'll go over more of this site later, but for now, let's just look at these poll results. Obviously, these aren't a complete shoo-in for the Melee roster. I mean, in 3rd place here was Wario, who didn't make his Smash debut until Brawl. Regardless though, a pretty good amount of characters listed here did eventually make it into the final game as a playable character, even if it took 2 decades for one of them. And regardless of how much potential anyone actually had, I just feel like it's funny to look at these results. I won't delay the topic any longer. Here in 12th place, in a 3-way tie, is Mr. Saturn. Yeah, this little creature. Out of everyone from Earthbound, this is what got people's attention. When you see what else is in this 3-way tie, it's even funnier. First you have Satoshi. Now, normally this is what Ash is referred to, so it's pretty likely people were just wanting Ash specifically in the game, but in parentheses following is the word protagonist, so I have to imagine it was a deal where Ash was frequently requested, but in the sense of him being a Pokemon protagonist representation, which we now have in the form of Pokemon Trainer, kinda. It's a bit loose, but you can still see the connection, and either way, this is a major face for the biggest gaming franchise ever. I don't actually know how big it was back then, but it was still pretty big, right? And then there's just Fire Emblem character. Unspecified, they just wanted someone, I guess. And looking at the modern roster, I think these people got their wish. And right above these 3, with just a few extra votes, is Marth. So we can see about where Mr. Saturn is placed in terms of character importance, I guess. Elephant in the room is obviously the vote count, right? With 18 votes on Mr. Saturn, that's a very realistic number for a cult of Dosei worshippers to skew the results. But everything is proportional, and as we'll look more into soon, it didn't seem like this was a poll of choose one of these characters, but rather something a lot more free-form. For other funny results, we can point out how high up James Bond is, and imagining that in modern day feels equally unfitting yet still somehow possible. Perhaps if he kept having games released that were as successful and beloved as GoldenEye 007, it might have worked out, I don't know. Next is Toad, who got 9th place, and who actually ended up as just a counter system rather than a playable character. It's kind of funny thinking about that, then coming to modern Smash where Piranha Plant is playable. And lastly, for things I found interesting was 15th place, Gooey from the Kirby series, who ranked 6 entire votes higher than Meta Knight. Not only did I completely forget this character even existed until now, but I guess society did too, because his only appearance in the game now is as a spirit, despite again having more votes than Meta Knight. And hell, I don't even own him! I grabbed this off of Google Images. I mean, to be fair, being a spirit is technically more useful than what Mew ends up doing as a Pokeball, and it was ranked even higher on the poll, but still, it's just kind of funny, so it's a fall from grace. Rest in peace, Gooey. Anyways, the source of these results seems to come from a series of comments made in response to various topics. It's basically like a ton of Q&As or a blog or something, where someone can write a post, or I guess it's kind of like a letter, because in this text down here, it seems to be Sakurai responding to them. I read through a bit of them and they seem very freeform, with people just sort of leaving their thoughts on certain things and what they'd like to see in the next Smash game. If that was a thing, it was very hypothetical back then. Considering basically all of them have a response from Sakurai, I have to imagine that the ones we're seeing are only the ones with responses, so there's possibly a whole sea of them not present that were still kind of counted for this vote system. Regardless, I was very curious about how many times Mr. Saturn, or Dosei-san, is mentioned here. Yeah, you see how all the blog pages are a purplish color instead of blue? Yeah, I went through every single page and Control F searched for Mr. Saturn's name just to see how many times he was mentioned. One time he was mentioned, but only when he was someone's username, and another time he was mentioned, but in the context of certain phrases that people would want to see in the game. I guess people really love his honking sound. So that just leaves 5 examples of people mentioning Mr. Saturn, specifically in the context of wanting him as a playable character. The ones on pages 6, 148, 152, and 156 are just pretty plain and simple requests for Mr. Saturn in the next game, so the fact that they're earnest is still something worth taking note of, right? And of course, you can pause to read my loose translations if you'd like. But the thing I really want to focus on comes from page 20, since this is the one where Sakurai himself talks about Mr. Saturn's inclusion more directly. JH here says rather than Jigglypuff, they would have wanted Mr. Saturn in there to take their place. In Sakurai's response, he says that Mr. Saturn has no hands, so using only his feet and nose for the about 15 fundamental attacks is a bit difficult. Because of that, I had plans to release him as an item instead, but even that was called off. So unfortunately, despite the fact that there definitely seemed to be people who actually wanted a playable Mr. Saturn in Smash, Sakurai probably wasn't going to go with that idea from the start. It's a bit of a shame, but I guess having hands is a really important prerequisite to Smash, and looking at the modern and complete roster of Smash Ultimate, every single character does have some form of hands. So discrimination wins again. Sorry, Mr. Saturn. Also, I should say this now, but while I'm not 1000% sure this is Sakurai, given that the front page claims this site was written by him, and these responses are written from someone clearly involved in the development, I think it's safe to say that that's the case. The whole page is in Japanese, but I'll still link it down below. There's a few other interesting things on here that I think could be fun to share, so if you want to see that in a future video, please let me know down in the comments. Anyways, even though Mr. Saturn can't be a playable nose-extending fighter, he does still have some fun attributes as an item. For one, the wiki brings up how Mr. Saturn is one of the few items in the game that cannot be swallowed or eaten by characters like Kirby, DDD, etc. It suggests that it's because Mr. Saturn is a living creature, and that's why it can't be eaten. But for one, I don't know what that says about Bob-ombs. They seem pretty alive in the Mario RPG games, but I guess whatever. And for two, while the logic does work in other areas, such as Kukos, who also cannot be consumed, and Pokeballs, which house living creatures that, again, can't be consumed, assist trophies also house living creatures, right? Yeah, those can be eaten just fine. Actually, that's kind of weird, isn't it? Also, both the Smash Ball and fake Smash Ball cannot be swallowed, and neither can the grass, which all makes sense. And it's also worth pointing out that the Ramblin' Evil Mushroom can be swallowed, but I think that's a bit more intuitive. Actually, wait, isn't that technically alive too? Also, instead of swallowing the Warp Star, you just sort of grab it. In a way that's akin to transformation items, but is just kinda weird for this. What's also weird is how at higher percents, Mr. Saturn actually spikes grounded opponents. Like really high percents, we're talking sudden death range. The knockback does scale, so eventually you'll be able to KO opponents with this grounded spike at ludicrously high percents. Like you'd actually have an easier time KOing them with the basic knockback. But you know, it's still just really weird, and while that's not new information on this channel, I figured I might as well bring it up again. Lastly, for Mr. Saturn, it's mentioned how apparently in the textures for the Metroid Assist trophy in Brawl, there's a tiny Mr. Saturn sprite hidden within it. It can't be seen in-game, but looking at the texture files themselves, Yeah, okay, I guess it's just right there. Yeah, no, that's actually a really great attention to detail, since Mr. Saturns are fully canon to the Metroid series in this fashion. It's just an excellent job at being faithful. Now, as for something that's not faithful at all, the BEETLE item is designed around, obviously, the item you get in Skyward Sword. However, very specifically, it's designed after the first version of the BEETLE that you get, both in Smash 4 and here in Smash Ultimate. What does this matter? Well, the basic version of the BEETLE is only capable of flight, cutting things, and bonking into things. It's actually a whole point where you gotta upgrade the BEETLE into the Hook BEETLE, where it gets these fancy mandibles, and only then is it able to carry things. You know, carrying things, the only purpose the BEETLE actually has as an item. So yeah, the version in Smash should not be capable of the only real interaction it has, which is goofy. And also just not very necessary at all, since I think Hook BEETLE still sounds cool and it still looks cool, but whatever. But that's not all for these Zelda inconsistencies. For the Great Plateau, the background isn't actually accurate to how it is in-game. By demolishing the tower, our basic view is Death Mountain on the right, Hyrule Castle towards the center and a bit to the left, with the pedestal in the center and facing the screen. It's a pretty good backdrop, right? Everything is just sort of where it should be. However, actually going into Breath of the Wild, the view is completely different. Here we have the Dueling Peaks on the right, and Death Mountain is on the left now. But if we walk over here, now we get a pretty good view of what we see in Smash. It seems they just took the tower and rotated it like, I don't know, 45 degrees or something to the left, and I really can't blame them because having a background view with both Hyrule Castle and Death Mountain is a lot more interesting than what we get here. I mean, this isn't uninteresting, but you know, having Hyrule Castle is probably pretty mandatory for something like this. Though it's also interesting putting these two accurate shots together, because even if they're more similar, it's still pretty clearly different. Even ignoring the colors and saturation and stuff, they obviously played a lot with perspective and general layout for the Smash version. As in Breath of the Wild, Death Mountain is a lot farther away and smaller in comparison than here. I reckon they just took an image and just stretched it and panned it out to help things pop even better. I'm pretty sure that's what they do for a lot of these 2D backgrounds anyways. It's really interesting actually making all these comparisons. I guess in the past I just went, oh yeah, no, this version in Smash is just the same thing, yippee! So actually getting a good look at the discrepancies is fun. Oh, speaking of discrepancies, there's another one for this map, though I think it's a bit less intentional. If you go to the camera and look at the ground, you may see a bunch of shadows everywhere. This does include cloud shadows that come and go, which I thought was a really neat detail, but for what the wiki mentioned, you'll notice the shadow of the Sheikah Tower itself. It's kind of weird that the spire isn't in this grounded shadow, but instead just has its shadow on the stage floor. I feel like that's not quite right, and they just probably did that because they didn't want to have to update the shadow on the floor, right? And regardless, we can see the very basic outline here, and it looks generally fine, right? Well, if we go to either of the other versions of the stage, you'll see that the tower has been replaced with, of course, a floating platform thing. And yet, the shadow for the tower is still down there, the same as it always has been, despite the fact that there is no tower and thus nothing connecting it to the ground. And now this is a very big oopsie whoopsie, though I think I'll start to wrap up this actually part of the video and just move on. To change the pace, here's a form of accuracy in the stage that's fun, in the form of the Sheikah text scattered throughout it, of which the wiki goes over a handful, though I'll probably go over a bit more. And actually, I'll just leave the Sheikah alphabet right here if you ever want to cross-reference. On the basic spire, the text is cut off for some reason, but with the proper angle you can see it just says Sheikah Tower all around. I don't really understand why the text is cut off. There's very clearly a whole space here after the S, so if everything shifted over one spot it would have fit into this entire part of the column, but whatever. And when you destroy the spire, the platform that replaces it has text that just reads Smash Bros all around. Though if you look on the left side and have good memory, you'll probably see that this text is technically different. And what it actually says is Sorbu Sams. Now 10 seconds to guess what this means. Yeah, it's just Smash Bros backwards. I guess it just got mirrored going onto this side, because the right side of the platform is written out just fine. And actually yeah, once I look at it a bit more, it's 100% mirrored. Most of the symbols are symmetrical, so normally it'd be hard to tell, but since an A looks like this, and on here it looks like this, yeah, this is just mirrored and it's pretty funny. Though this is neat because if we head over to the Battlefield version of the stage, these platforms also have Smash Bros written all over them, but it's also properly written on both sides, no mirroring. And the text on the platform itself just spells out Sheikah Tower on the bottom, just like before, also including the odd spaces between the first and last letter like before. I don't know, maybe it's stylistic, maybe I'm the one who's stupid. And on the rim, it reads Smash Bro, which just loops. Technically, that means it is missing the S at the end of bros, like we had seen in all the other instances of this. And I have to imagine that's an error that was overlooked since the phrase would start and end with the same letter. But maybe again that was stylistic, I don't know. Also, this looping is just really weird because over here you can see that it goes from Smash Bro, as we've been seeing before, then to just Sash Bros? Either it's missing the M for some reason, or the word was properly Smash Bros with an S before, and this just says Ash Bros? I mean, either way, this is probably not stylistic and is just another case of a funny oopsie daisies. There's technically a few more things I could look at in that regard, but I think I'll leave the transcribing there. Lastly, for the Sheikah Tower, this is technically ancient knowledge on this channel, but just to remind anyone who hasn't been watching for over 3 years, if you jump up to the top of the spire, sometimes with very good timing and positioning, you'll just die. It's funny to think that the spire is spiky and that's what KOs you, but in reality what's happening is that you're standing on top of the spire, and because it's past the upper blast zone, it just KOs you. It's why you can technically go up infinitely and yet will still get KO'd while standing on a platform that's moving up like this, despite not getting hit. The wiki then brings up how if we make use of the Devil Assist trophy, we could technically move the camera, and thus the blast zone, up enough to where we won't get KO'd. Now I have to admit I had a whole little training arc here, because testing this out when you're not able to consistently get this spire thing to happen is really annoying. Luckily, I found the perfect timing with Jigglypuff and the bunny hood to get it to happen almost every time, and when I do that, here I am, standing on the spire and not dying. It almost makes me sad to think I didn't do this way before, but it's still really cool to see now. Like seriously, this spire fact is among the first dozen or so trivia things I'd ever gone over in my Random Facts series, so I'm kinda glad I can revisit it like this. And with that lovely revisit, I'm actually just gonna end the video. And you know what, I don't really have much on mind to say for this outro section, but oh, I've actually been getting back into fishing quite a bit recently. It's been a lot of fun. I've loved fishing for a long time now. Do any of y'all like fishing? Have any stories to tell in the comments or anything? Here, actually, okay, here, I got this funny video a while ago from when I was going out for panfish to test out my setup. Okay guys, watch this. Just drop it in. There's only like an inch of worm on there, not even. Oh, it's moving. It's moving, Dumbass. It's funny, right? That fish is called a pumpkin seed, by the way. Though I've heard other names like sunfish, or pond perch, or whatever. Honestly, it's kind of absurd how many different names basically every type of fish can go by. And it's a really gorgeous fish too, isn't it? It's got really nice colors. I mean, it's super easy to catch and they don't get too big, but I think they're still really cool. Maybe I'll share some more fishing stories or clips or images later. I'm trying to get a really good image of everything I catch so I could have like one image of each species I get, sort of like a catalog or something. So that'll be fun. Anyways, that'll be that, and I'd like to give a massive thank you to my fantastically phenomenal patrons Raighne, Sylvan700, Burbo, Isaac Bragna, SpiderJew, and everyone else for the support. Stay casual, and I'll see y'all later.